If you're familiar with the biblical story of Jonah, you may have either been troubled by the apparent scientific impossibility of a human surviving inside of a whale, or you've dismissed it as outright fantasy. Those who have persisted in their inquiry may have come to the conclusion that this is an allegory describing an historic event. Regardless of your response, it's unhelpful to spend time on debates alone, because that leaves us tangled up in the periphery. The story is not included in our sacred writings to fuel our controversies, but to cultivate our flourishing. How can it do that? We'll look at the characters of the story, the point of it, and where we find parallels in ourselves. We'll first look at the assignment. Then we'll consider the human resistance to that assignment and the divine response. We'll determine the purpose of the kind of assignment Yahweh has orchestrated, and ultimately, the invitation it presents. And no, you will not be here till 2 o'clock. In considering the summary that Kevin read for us, we come face to face with a straightforward assignment. Get up. Go to the great city of Nineveh right now. Raise a cry against it. Tell them that I know all of its crimes. That was Yahweh speaking. There was no explanation of why Jonah was chosen, nor was an expected outcome ever mentioned. Just go. Give these people the message. Jonah is typically considered a prophet, but nowhere in the 4 chapters of the book is Jonah mentioned as such. Only in the headings that have been put in by later translators. But he was summoned and given an assignment. Its purpose seemed clear at the outset, but as this story unfolds, we begin to wonder if there is a deeper, more universal meaning to this assignment. Jonah's response is immediate. He gets up, he goes in the opposite direction. It's as if he's just allergic to Yahweh's assignment. As the story continues, we begin to understand just how vehemently Jonah hates the Ninevites. He wants nothing more than to see them destroyed. And this hatred then converts into decisive resistance. Not the positive connotation of resistance to evil that we kind of quickly and almost carelessly speak about today, but rather a resistance that wishes a whole city destroyed instead of even considering a different attitude toward people he considers enemies. Jonah had an illusion about Israel's enemies and made the assumption that Yahweh would share that perspective, that God somehow would hate the same people that he despised. Now that should give us some pause for thought. So Jonah runs. He hides in the lower deck of the ship, sailing for a distant shore. He breathes a sigh of relief and falls asleep, free at last. But he's about to find out. It somehow makes me wonder how often this assignment had been presented before this to result in such a dramatic response. What happens next can be seen as God's judgment, or it can be seen as an invitation to change, to see differently. So far, we know only that Jonah hates the Ninevites. But Jonah's free at last isn't permanent. Very quickly, the sailors of the vessel he's boarded struggle against an epic storm. Our text tells us that they are crying out to their gods as they begin to hurl cargo overboard. Nothing works. The storm rages on. These drastic measures to save their own lives and the lives of everyone else on board lead them to the lower deck, where they discover the sleeping passenger. This is when we begin to discover just to what lengths Jonah is willing to go in order not to comply with his assignment, in order not to have to give up his illusions. When the sailors demand who is responsible after casting lots, they confront Jonah. Hey man, what are you doing? And where are you going? But in other words, they're asking, what kind of grievous crime have you committed to activate a next level natural disaster? Are you a murderer? Have you defrauded countless people? Are you a serial abuser? Who are you? Jonah simply says, I am a Hebrew. In my tradition, the God I adhere to has created the land and the sea, and I've run away from that deity. Just throw me overboard and everything will be fine. Imagine the tight spot the sailors are in now. Not only is this man's God wreaking havoc on this voyage, they've already lost all of their potential business profit. But ultimately, they know they'll all go down together with a ship if they don't at least try what Jonah is suggesting. They're conflicted. They're hesitant to do this. But Jonah persists. Imagine how determined Jonah is that he would rather die than comply with the assignment. Was the purpose of this assignment only to give this message to the Ninevites? Or is there a deeper, more universal meaning to all of that? But as soon as Jonah hits that roiling water, the sea is calm. He's swallowed by a whale. So states our text. He finds himself in Yahweh's predetermined, divinely constructed cocoon. Not a punishment, but an invitation. As we considered several weeks ago, in the cocoon, the caterpillar gives up his form and his very existence, not knowing what will come. The imaginal cells contained within the caterpillar know what's coming, but the caterpillar doesn't. This is the magic of the cocoon. The imaginal cells cause the caterpillar to dissolve into an indistinguishable goo before it is transformed into a beautiful butterfly. Jonah was handed this opportunity, but he resists at every turn. Even inside of that cocoon, in that dark and slimy place, the place of horror, of agony and fear and apparent abandonment. How can I say with complete confidence that Jonah continued to resist from within the whale, from within that dark place, the cocoon, the place of perceived abandonment? Well, take a look at this prayer that Felicia read for us. Jonah allegedly prayed that prayer from this place of horror, but when we listen to the words more closely, it's a statement written in the past tense. It seems more like a retrospective, a recognition and a recounting of past events. Out of my despair, I cried to you, and you answered me. Floods overwhelmed me. All your waves, your torrents washed over me. Past tense. These are recorded words of his prayer. So when did he write those? Did he write that after he had reached land safely again? Yes, his words begin with his despair at his sudden plight that he has been pressed into, and the faithfulness of Yahweh to take note of this dire situation. So as he recounts his experiences along with these feelings, he asks the question, will I ever look upon your holy temple? And in ancient words that reads, will I ever experience the divine again? Imagine once more that you are in such an awful place that words defy its description. Possibly the prison for detainees in El Salvador would be such a place, though none of us truly know how horrific it is. In that place, Jonah seems to do absolutely no soul searching as to how he had landed here. No recollection of his stubbornness, his defiant hatred of people who are his fellow humans, no introspection about the fundamental belief system which upholds this illusion, absolutely nothing. He only wonders if he will see the face of the divine again or whether he will be banished forever. No repentance, no remorse, no recognition of his own actions that led to this crisis for real people. The sailors, for example, who had no part in his antics. Nothing like that. Instead, he makes a judgment statement about the people who are not like him, who do not believe like he does, who in his eyes are inferior, if not worthless. Here are his words. Those who cling to worthless idols forsake their own well-being. And then he continues, but I will sacrifice to you with a song of thanksgiving, meaning I will not sacrifice to worthless idols like those sailors did. I will fulfill my vow that I made. Deliverance comes from Yahweh. That story reminds me of a parable that Jesus told about two men going to pray in the temple. One was a Pharisee, a prominent religious leader. The other was a tax collector, widely regarded as being the lowest rung of the Hebrew hierarchy because tax collectors collaborated with the oppressor. The Pharisee's prayer is also a statement. Actually, it's a list of his own achievements, demonstrating his superiority. The tax collector just said, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Now Jesus finishes that story declaring that the tax collector, who was humble, prayed authentically, which resulted in his spiritual freedom, while the Pharisees leave the place of prayer unchanged. Still boastful, still hateful, still bent on marketing his own superiority. Even though Jonah's escape plan placed him into the hands of people who, according to him, cling to worthless idols and forsake their own well-being, the sailors showed more mercy, more restraint, more genuinely righteous concern than Jonah. But Jonah hasn't grasped that for a minute, as he evidently spent no time in this harsh place contemplating his own life, just pleading for relief and a return to comfort. Oh, Jonah, the one who resisted the assignment and then wasted the cocoon, wishing rather to die physically than to die to the illusions of life he thought should be in place. And in that process, using his prayer to disregard and humiliate those who tried to save his life. That's pretty low. After he miraculously regains his life, the invitation to reframe his belief system comes again. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach to them as I have told you to do. And he goes, reluctantly. He's obviously putting in time, unwilling to risk another episode in another horrible place. But the response to his message was not what he had expected, and obviously not what he had hoped for. Jonah would have loved to see further evidence of the criminality of these people. People despising Yahweh's call, a confirmation that the Ninevites were an evil, worthless people, and he had been right all along. That's not what happened. There was repentance. There was humility. There was evidence that the people of Nineveh went into the cocoon for their transformation at the first invitation. They did not justify themselves nor argue with this message. Nope. They embraced the invitation. They prayed, they fasted, they made themselves uncomfortable. And the outcome for them was mercy and hope. Nineveh was very large, and the only way to get around was by foot. So it took Jonah 3 days to even walk through this city. And when the day's assignment of his preaching was done, he sat down outside of the city to rest and to watch and to pout. In fact, Jonah doesn't just pout. He's indignant and goes into a rage saying, "Come on now, Yahweh, this is exactly what I thought would happen when I was still in my own country. This is why I left and I went to Tarshish. I knew you were a God of tenderness and compassion, slow to anger, rich in kindness, relenting from violence. No, please take my life. I'd rather be dead than keep on living." Now, we all know toddlers. Anyway, that one is definitely not on the same in the same category. So if that wasn't enough evidence, Yahweh continues. He makes a plant to grow further, allowing shade for Jonah. So there was a shade in the heat of the sun. Jonah was overjoyed. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. But when that plant withers and dies the very next day, he's again furious about being placed in an uncomfortable position again. Even when Yahweh directly confronts him about his blatant hypocrisy and his self-centeredness, Jonah says, "Yes, I have every right to be angry about this plant." Oh, Jonah, the one who resists the assignment and then wastes the cocoon twice, wishing rather to die physically than to die to an illusion of life as he thought it was. He refuses to question his own prejudice against the Ninevites, even though they have embraced Yahweh's invitation to transformation. Not one of us will outlive, outrun, outmaneuver times of darkness. But we may choose to kick and fight and argue and go into a rage rather than surrender to disintegration, which is not the same as destruction. Disintegration for the sake of transformation. We often choose to die a caterpillar rather than to allow the dark place to engage these imaginal cells and restructure us into a masterpiece. Butterflies that soar and fly, who create such joy for everyone around them. The story of Jonah is not included in our sacred writings to pad our preconceptions, but to cultivate our flourishing. To give up our illusions to how we think life should be so that we can metamorphose into a beautiful butterfly, into an adult. Bringing joy, not uttering curses. Engaging in a life-bringing mission rather than going through the motion of drudgery. The cocoon is an opportunity to allow the divine to challenge our illusions, the assumptions that we are right, to give up what is comfortable and familiar for a very unexpected and uncharted place. I've never been inside the belly of a whale, but I have been trapped in sleepless hours and countless nights, wrestling with one dragon, one illusion, one tightly held yet crumbling certainty after another. I've never had seaweed wrapped around my neck, but I have experienced the tightness of a lean life, a life in which lack and limitation threaten to strangle me. I've never stared death in the face, wondering if I will see the divine or another human being again. But I have endured the alienation of a child because of my commitment to safety and inclusion. Every dark night of the soul, every cocoon, every invitation to let go of something that offers false security is an invitation to metamorphosis. The caterpillar doesn't demand security or perfection or comfort. Like it, we too can surrender to the slow, systematic work of the Spirit who acts in harmony with our own imaginal selves to produce more perseverance, growth, humility. A butterfly. May we all become people who, unlike Jonah, are no longer recognizable after our time in the cocoon. May it be so.